Thank you all so much for being here. Congratulations, first of all. You guys made it to Illinois History Day. That's why you're here to work on your process papers, and that is a huge achievement. We just can't say it enough. It's a big deal even in a normal year, but this was not a normal year. This was a really exceptional year, and so you all did exceptional work to make it to this point, and we want to congratulate you. Let's talk about the process paper. This is a big a part of moving the state. This is going to be a big shift for a lot of you. And I know the words like calling it a paper sounds like a big deal and intimidating, but it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. And so hopefully my goal is for you at the end of this meeting to feel really empowered and good about your ability to create a process paper that is going to breeze through state with no problems at all. So today's agenda, we're going to kind of talk about this in two different parts. The first part is kind of the rules. So like, what do you need? How do you submit it? How does it look different for the different project categories? So like your process paper, if you do a website, is going to show up a little bit differently than your process paper if you do an exhibit. So those types of things. And then how do you get that to us and submitted to the state competition? This is like a side note. We do not run the state competition. That's run by Illinois History Day, but we are kind of facilitating that. So you guys we're going to help you make sure that your projects are in compliance. So that's part of the reason we're having them submit to you, so we can take a quick look at your process paper and hopefully give you a heads up if we notice that something is off before you go into state. So we're really trying to set you up for success, and we definitely don't want anybody to have any like compliance issues at state. So this is going to be really great for helping you understand all of that. And then the second major part of today will just be how to write it. So it has four major parts of the process paper, and we'll go over them one by one, how to answer those different sections and talk about those different sections of the process paper. So first, let's jump into part one, talking about the rules and submission process. So first of all, what is the process paper? This is straight out of the NHD rulebook. This is the whole entire description of the process paper. There's no more detail or information or appendices or anything like that. What you see on the screen right now is the full description of NHD for the process paper. So all categories except a paper. So this is important. If you wrote a paper, this is going to be a little bit different for you, and you do not need to submit this process paper in the same way. But basically all of the categories besides a paper must include a process paper with their entry. This entry must describe in 500 or fewer words. That's like usually going to get you 500 words is probably going to put you between a page and a page and a half, or I'm sorry, a page and 2 pages, like double spaced. So 500 words or fewer, and it explains how you conducted your research and created your entry. It does not restate your argument. It does not demonstrate all the great knowledge that you gained. It talks about how you conducted your research and created your entry. So I'm going to say this like 50 times throughout the workshop today. Let your project speak for itself. The process paper is separate from your project. If there's something you need the judges to know about your topic, that's an important part of your analysis, that needs to go in your project. It doesn't make a difference whether it's in your process paper or not, because the process paper is not really part of your score. It's just an important part of compliance. So I'm going to say this over and over again throughout the workshop, because especially with the time crunch you guys are on, I don't want you agonizing in the next few days about your process paper. I want to equip you to knock this thing out quickly and directly and in a quality way. But I don't want you to, if you have a choice between spending your time editing your project and working on your process paper, that time is better spent on your project. So the process paper is about compliance. It's about checking off these boxes. It's not about re-arguing your project. So I'm going to say that over and over again today. It's so, so important. So in that paper, you have 4 sections. The first is how you chose your topic. And I'm going to go over these one by one a little bit later when I get into like how you write it section. But for now, just kind of an overview. How you chose your topic, how you conducted your research, how you selected your category, so like website, documentary, exhibit, and created the project, how you built it, and then how your project relates to the NHD theme. Hopefully, as you're reading this, you're realizing this is really good news because you've already answered like 3 out of 4 of these questions in your summary statement. And so converting your summary statement into a process paper is going to get you a lot of the way there with your process paper, which is great. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about kind of the requirements and what is the process paper before I get you into writing it. Another little wrinkle with the process paper that you're going to need for all your project category, and I'm going to go over how these vary, like for exhibits and documentaries in just a second in more detail, but pretty much every category is going to also include a title page. If you did a website, it's a little different because the home page of your website acts as that title page. So in addition to the process paper, like I was saying, each category is also going to need one of these title pages. Here's some ideas of how these look. This is also in the handout that Sarah posted into the chat. These screenshots are in there as well. So the title page is just your like kind of crucial info. So your name, whether you're in junior or senior division, the category. So like you should put group exhibit or individual exhibit or group performance or whatever that is. And then the student composed word count, which again, I'll talk about in a second. Some of you have already even done a title page like this. Like a lot of times when people submit their summary statement, they might include a title page that's sort of similar to this. So you can use that as a starting point. You just need to make sure that it follows this format exactly. Again, like the title page is not something that judges are judging you on, but that's something they need to see to accept your project. So that's just kind of a compliance thing, not part of your score. But it's really important that it's there. So don't stress about like the font and the size and stuff like that, but just make sure the info is there. Okay. When I talk about relevant word counts, this is just an important note. For the process paper, it's like every word of the process paper because they're all your words as the student. Like you are just writing the process paper. You shouldn't be citing things in your process paper. But when you talk about your word count in your exhibit, or your word count in your website, or your word count in your papers, we are looking only for the student composed word count. A lot of you know this already. This is the same rule as for your summary statement, but just to be super clear for state, this is only the student composed word count. So do not count anything that you took as a quote from a source, either primary or secondary source. If you're quoting someone else's words, that doesn't count. If your citations and footnotes, so if you say this photo, 1965 Chicago Defender, that doesn't count because that's a citation, or your footnotes, and then nothing in your bibliography counts. So even your annotations do not count toward your student composed word count. So just keep that in mind as you're listing out that word count on your title pages. And then, so moving on, the homepage for the websites looks a little bit different. So a couple of you I saw did say in the chat that you're working on websites. You do not need to do a title page like a document because you have a homepage on your website that serves that same purpose. So this is straight cut and pasted out of the NHD rulebook. But the first page your visitors see should contain your name or your names if you're in a group, your entry title. A lot of times, like if your entry title is like, Martin Luther King, Breaking Barriers in History, that's going to be a lot of times like in big text across the top of the screen. You don't necessarily need to list it again down here, but it is helpful, and it's going to be helpful to the judges to just kind of like keep it in the way they're expecting to see it. So using this graphic, if you did a web page, is going to be just a good guide for you. So your names or your group names, your entry title, it doesn't need to be repeated, but it doesn't hurt. And then your division, like I said, junior or senior, they can tell that it's a website, but it doesn't hurt to say like junior group website or senior individual website or something like that, to let them know whether it's group or individual. Again, they can tell because you put your names, but it doesn't hurt. And then the number of words in your process paper. So you'll have 2 word counts on your website homepage, basically, and this is the same as you'll see on exhibits, that you have your number of student composed words, and that means in the project, so in the website or exhibit, and then you have the number of words in your process paper. So you're going to have 2 word counts. In quick chart form, this is what you're looking for. So those of you who are joining us today who did exhibits, You still need your annotated bibliography, and then you need your process paper with that title page, okay? But you're going to need your annotated bibliography and your process paper with the title page. You do not need your summary statement anymore. You can still include it. It's fine to leave it with your submission. You don't need to delete it, but it's not going to be something that the judges at state are looking for. They're going to be looking for that process paper instead. If you are competing with a documentary, exact same thing. So we still need that annotated bibliography, and we need that process paper with the title page. This time there's no word count to worry about on the title page, but we do need that in bibliography. And then same deal, you can keep the summary statement there, but you don't need it anymore. And then performances, same deal as the previous two. Where things get a little bit different is with your websites. So on a website, you've got your annotated bibliography, and that's embedded on your site already. You are going to need your process paper also embedded on your site. So a lot of you have like a tab or a page that's like references or citations. I would encourage you to add another like subsection to that for your process paper and just add that in. Again, if you want to remove your summary statement, you could. It's not required, but you could leave it there. It's not going to hurt or anything like that. And notice I put here that I just put process paper. I did not put process paper with title page because your home page accomplishes that goal for you. So your process paper doesn't need a separate title page, if that makes sense, because your home page of the website is handling that information. Some people do it anyway. Like some people just feel more comfortable having a cover page, having a cover page on that process paper. That's fine, but it's not something that's going to be required. And then papers are a little bit different. So papers, you need your annotated bibliography. That's the same for all of these, right? That's key. You need a title page, but you don't do a process paper with the paper. You just need that title page. We also suggest, because judges find it really useful and helpful, a separate page that has your thesis stated on it. Judges love seeing that in the summary statement. It's really helpful for them. And so having a separate page with your thesis and optionally an outline of your paper can be helpful. That is not required. So if paper students, that star there means it's kind of an option. Judges will appreciate it if you have time, especially the thesis, really good idea, but you're not going to be like disqualified or lose out if you don't include that thesis and outline page. Okay. So I think we're almost to the end of this section. I want to talk a little bit about how to submit the process paper first. Some of you are submitting everything through your teachers and you are not working directly with us to submit your projects. That's okay. You can kind of ignore this section then. You work with your teacher and your teacher will collect these things from you and they're submitting them for you. But some of you in this room I know are submitting the things on your own. Like you have been submitting your virtual projects to us personally. So I want to talk about how to do that. If you are making revisions to your whole project, so if you have an exhibit and you want to change some of the text or you want to swap out one of your sources or something like that, that is fine. You are allowed to do that for state as long as your teacher gives you permission to do that. And you will just submit your project along with the process paper and everything, just like you did before to our WeTransfer website. Do not share Google files with us. We cannot see them and they can't be accepted. So make sure you are submitting like actual PDF or image files through our WeTransfer. For websites, you do not need to submit anything from us. This is the way it's always been for you for websites this year. Just make sure your website has everything you want on it by the deadline, which is going to be May 6th at 6 p.m. You do not need to submit. You don't need to send us your process paper. It just needs to be on your website the same way that your bibliography is. And then if you're not making revisions to your project, this is a wild year. We know it's a very short time that you have to submit. So some students might not be able to make changes or not have access to their projects or whatever. That's okay. We understand. In that case, you can just submit just the process paper. You don't need to resubmit the whole project if you're not making changes. We hope you can make changes for state. We hope you have that chance, but it's okay if you don't. And just a quick side note for everybody here, everyone else who's going to state, who's going to Illinois History Day, is kind of in the same boat as far as not really having any time to make revisions. So I just want you to know that you're not at a disadvantage at state because of this, right? This has been a statewide thing. So don't feel like you are getting punished or have been at a disadvantage. I know it's a short time and it's unusual, but we're really proud of you for pushing through and working on this short timetable. So don't feel like it's not ideal. It's obviously different than all of us were expecting, but don't feel like you're getting a short straw or a disadvantage or anything like that. I just want to mention that. Okay, I think I am through my first section. If we are not revising, do we only need to send you process paper? That is correct. So if you are not able or have time to revise your project itself, just send us the process paper. You don't need to totally resubmit. So like, let's say you did a documentary, you don't need to send us your video files again, only the process paper, if you're fine with us using what you had already competed with at your first round. There's juniors and seniors here, so some of you competed at senior finals and some of you competed at junior regionals. Let's talk about how to actually write it. So we've talked about like what it is and how to get it to us, but what do you actually write in this thing? So this is the part that we will demystify for you. It's really very straightforward. So before we kind of jump into the 4 parts of the paper, some key points. That's my history fair tumbler. First of all, this thing is only 500 word limit. This is not a big long essay. It's usually, like I said, about a page to 2 pages, double spaced, like with the default settings on your word processor usually. And that is a limit. That is not a minimum. So if you can answer all the parts of the process paper and you can answer all those 4 questions in like 300 words, do that, right? There is no, I'm just going to say this again and again. The process paper is not being judged. So the judges need to see it. They need to see that you've addressed all 4 of those parts of the process paper. We're about to go over them one by one. But they are not supposed to say, hey, this process paper is too short. I'm going to deduct some points from this project or anything like that. So just keep in mind, your project is what is getting evaluated by the judges. Your process paper is just sort of there to help them do that and to show them that you followed the rules. One of the biggest things for the process paper is to help the judges see that the tone in the process paper matches the tone in the project itself, so that they can see that you were doing your all original work all the way through. So it's just really important to just like be yourself, be upfront in the process paper. Sorry, I got off of my bullet points. So the next thing, don't re-argue your project. Your project needs to stand on its own. Your process paper is about your process. Your project is where you give your argument. So don't re-argue. Don't try and re-convince the judges of everything you said in your project. They want to see that in your project, right? If they came to look at your exhibit, they want to see your argument in your exhibit, not written on your paper. The paper is there to teach them about your actual process and what you did to get there. It's not directly scored, but it can be helpful to judges. So, having a process paper with a couple of typos or spelling mistakes is not going to hurt your score. But it could be, if the judges are looking at your project and they are really wondering where you got some of your information, it's not clear. Maybe they're confused about where some of your information was sourced and they can't match up the source in your bibliography to where it is on the board. A lot of times that process paper can help them understand, right? They start to read about how did you do your research, how did you use your sources, and they can sort of find that information. But it's not something they're judging directly. So I'm really just trying to get you to stress less about the process paper. If you answer the 4 parts of it clearly and directly, you're good to go. Use your summary statement as a starting point. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. And then write your process paper, write a quality draft of your process paper. But once you have a quality draft that answers the 4 sections of the process paper, and you have 1 day left to continue making some revisions, revise your project, not your process paper. Okay, it's okay for your process paper to be kind of not quite I don't want to say a first draft, but we understand, right? Every judge is going to understand the condensed time that you've been through, and they really are going to want to see your hard work focused on the project more so than on the process paper. Great question. I got a question in the chat. Can the process paper be split into different sections, or can it be combined into one? I'm going to mention that again at the end, but you do not need to use headings. A lot of times people use one paragraph per per number of the process paper, one for each of those 4 parts. But there's no requirement as to the format. Some people use headings. Usually judges are not a big fan of that, so I kind of advise against it. But again, it's not something they're going to deduct points for. It's just a style thing. So no, you do not need to split it into different sections. I think the 1 paragraph per question is a good way to go, but not a requirement. Great question in the chat. Thank you for that. And then I put it in bold here, but just focus on addressing these 4 aspects of the process paper clearly and directly. If you get to the end of your process paper and you're like, you know what, I answered the 4 parts clearly and directly, then you're good to go. Stop worrying about your process paper at that point, because you can always improve it, you can always refine it, and it's a good skill to learn. But for where we are right now, we just need to get you competing at state. And so let's focus on getting that process paper done clearly and directly. Let's talk about how to do that. Let's dig in. So number 1, Sarah just dropped in the chat some examples. These are projects that competed at NHD over the past few years that you can browse through. A lot of them have process papers. They're good process papers, a good example of like what they can be. I just want to remind you, those are from students who went to nationals and usually won at nationals. So they're kind of like being selected from the best, like they're not just random process papers. They're kind of selected from the top projects. And they also wrote those process papers in a non-coronavirus year, and they had a lot of time in those non-coronavirus years to polish them. So I'm just saying, don't be intimidated by some of those drafts. Some of them are really like, I think some of them are a little overboard personally, but some of them can be kind of intimidating with their writing style. Don't feel like you need to match that. I think just clear and direct and being yourself is the way to go with the process paper. Anyway, let's get writing. So process paper part 1. The very first thing you need to talk about is how you chose your topic. Be direct and straightforward. This is not a test. There's no right or wrong answer here. Did you pick something about a famous heart surgeon because you've always been really interested in medicine or biology or something like that? Then talk about that. Talking about your passions is always a good way to go with this kind of thing. Judges love to hear about that, and it gives them a sense of who you are. Did breaking barriers make something pop into your mind, right? Like, did you pick your topic because it fit the theme well? We'll talk again about the theme more later. So don't go too into depth on that, but maybe you heard breaking barriers and you just immediately thought of the Berlin Wall or something like that and knew that's what you had to do your project on. Or did you pick your project off a list? Sometimes students don't want to like say this, right? Because they're worried. It's okay if you picked your project off the list. Everyone starts somewhere and you made it to state. So I think that's actually a really cool story if you can say, as part of your process, my teacher told us that we had to choose something. They gave me a list to pick from. I thought this thing sounded cool. And the more I looked into it, the more I learned and the more excited I got about it. And you can kind of teach them how your passion grew, and they're going to see that and they're going to really like that. So don't feel like you have to pretend that you got this like flash of inspiration or anything like that. If you did, that's cool too. But if you didn't, don't worry about it. We just want you to be honest and direct. And if you chose it off of a list, or if your teacher, you spent 3 weeks not deciding and your teacher finally said, here's your topic. Tell them that. That's a fun story too. And you made it this far on your project's merits. So like, you don't have to apologize or make excuses for your project. You should be really proud of your project, and your process is what got you this project. So you should be proud of your process too. So I just, sometimes I know students feel like it's a job interview or something and they want to sound impressive. And you don't need to do that here. We just want to know about your process. Authenticity is so important here. So letting the judges see that it's really the real you coming through is really important. On your summary statements, guys, on section 4A, it asks about your historical question. You remember that from completing your summary statements. What historical question did you start with, and how did it change as you did your research? That can help you answer this question. So a lot of times you chose your historical question based on the topic. So you've already probably written a little bit about this in your summary statement. It's not like a perfect copy and paste, but it should be helpful. Section 2 of the process paper. So back to the question in the chat, you could start this in a separate paragraph is probably the way to go. You don't need to use separate headings or anything like that. But however you want to break up the paper is fine. There's not like a specific list of paragraphs or limit of paragraphs. So number 2, how you conducted your research. This one is great because on your process paper, basically, questions like the last questions on there, 4B, C, and D, what kinds of sources did you use? Talk about one piece of evidence. List any institutions that you went to do your research. You've already talked about that in your summary statement. And so a lot of times you can convert that into talking about how you did your research. This can also look different depending on your different categories. But really want to encourage you to talk about, if you're not sure what to say here, judges are going to love hearing about how you adjusted to social distancing and virtual competition. You can revise for state and you can talk about that. So you can even make part of your process paper the way that you kind of revised your project to get things ready and adjusted your project to state. So you're going to talk about building your project again in a separate question later, but here you could talk about things like, I was set up to go to a library, but then the library is closed, and so I had to figure out a digital library subscription. That's a great story that the judges would love to hear. Or, I had a field trip scheduled to the museum, but then school was closed, and so I was forced to adjust in this way. Judges are going to love to see how you kind of like adjusted for the virtual contest in the ways that you did your research. Some of you, maybe your research was pretty much done before all this social distancing stuff, so maybe you won't have a lot to talk about there. But in that case, yeah, we just really encourage you to talk about like, what kinds of sources did you find? How did one source lead you to another? How did your historical question evolve as you did your research? And what were kind of, this is a really good place to mention, like it says in 4C, like kind of one great source that you had. So if you had one that was really super valuable for you, one that was a really good find, one that was kind of like rare or hard to find, or one that really like gave you like a light bulb moment, that's a good, you can feel free to mention those specifically if you can do so within your 500 word count. So just talk about how you conducted your research, and if you say, you know what, I did all of my research 100% online, but I did it using, online libraries, and I went to online digital collections, and I read online journals. That's really great, and the judges are going to love to hear that. So again, don't apologize or make excuses for your process. It got you to state, and you should be proud of it. So use this to show it off to the judges. You've done a really good job, so you should be proud, and you should tell them how you did a really good job. Moving on to question number 3, or the third kind of section of the process paper, how you selected your category and created your project. This one sometimes can be a little confusing for students because sometimes your teacher assigned you a category. That's okay. So first part of it, and I'm sorry, I meant to not have all this text on the screen at once, but the first part is explain why you chose your category. So why you chose to do an exhibit, a documentary, or performance, or whatever. Some of you, this section is going to be as simple as, at the school I go to, our teacher requires us to write papers, and so I wrote a paper. That's fine. That's a perfectly good reason to choose your category. But a lot of you had the option to choose between 2 or more categories. And so explain why you picked one instead of the other. Why did you choose to make an exhibit instead of a documentary? Maybe you just have no interest in editing video and you really wanted to do something with your hands and work on a board. That's a really good answer. So tell them that. Maybe your project was about a filmmaker, and so you thought maybe a paper is not going to do it. Maybe a documentary is going to be the best place to highlight this video. That's another great answer. So the judges are just looking for how you made those decisions. And again, that authenticity, making sure it's the real you, so important. Also, sometimes was working individually in a group a part of your decision? Some of you may have thought, I want to do an exhibit because then I can work with this certain partner, or maybe your teacher said, if you are working on an exhibit, you have to be in a group. And so that was a consideration for you or something like that. So just let them know kind of how you arrived at that decision and what that process looked like for you. And then, so how we selected our category and how we created our project. This one's going to, again, be like different depending on your project categories. So for exhibits, talking about how you created it, when, where, and how did you build it? Judges are interested in things like, we had one group member whose house was kind of home base and we all met there once a week, or we all met in the classroom, and Wednesdays were our history fair work days. They love to hear those details, so don't shy away from those. If you did something big and cool with building your exhibit, like if you did a fancy construction or a 3D thing, or built something out of wood or whatever, definitely talk about that here, because the judges aren't going to get to see it in person. They're going to see your pictures and everything, but they're not going to see it in person, so they'd love to hear about that. For performances, why and how and where did you build the I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. For performances, how and when and where did you practice and revise your script? So social distancing might come into play here, and you might talk about how, well, we wrote our script when we were at school, but we didn't get a chance to practice at all before social distancing, and so we practiced over the phone, or we FaceTimed each other and we practiced that way. Judges are going to love to hear that. For documentaries, websites, and papers, a lot of times the workflow can be a little bit different, and it can be more just someone sitting at a computer. But you can describe kind of your workflow or your timeline. You can talk about, I started and I had an outline on such and such date, or I started by building out all of my pages first, and then I filled in those pages with the details. Just kind of give them some insight into your process. I think, honestly, this question for judges is just really important for them to see that it's really your work and let you shine through. So they want to see, like, sometimes your projects are really, really amazing, and it's really hard for judges to, like, sometimes judges suspect, like, oh, this is so good, they must have had adult help or something. And this part can help them see that, like, no, you really are just that good, and help them see how you did your work. So you don't need to, like, tell them some groundbreaking new invention that you did to get your project done. Just describe your work process. And then this is, like, I would really encourage you here to talk about the switch to virtual. I see a question in the chat that I'm going to answer in just a second, but I really encourage you, talk somewhere in your process paper about the switch to virtual. I talked to all of our judges, and they are just blown away by all of you young people's ability to switch to, like, for a lot of our judges, the switch from doing things physically face to face to doing things virtually has been super hard, and they're, like, so impressed that you all were able to get your projects photographed and uploaded and all that stuff. Like, they're blown away. So telling them how you did that, like, how did you get the news? Like, oh, my teacher told us that school was going to be closed for the year, and so we grabbed our exhibit and we took it home, and we took as many pictures as we could, or we got the news and our project was locked in the school, so here's what we had to do. Like, tell them those details. It's going to be so humanizing, and they're going to really love hearing those types of details. Good. I have a really good question in the chat about group projects. It says, for group projects, should we each individually address how we chose our category and how we eventually combined our ideas together? I think that's a really cool idea. You just need to be careful, because you only get one process paper for the group, and it is only limited to those 500 words. So you're going to have to be really, like, economical and concise about your language. But I really like that idea. I think that would be a really cool insight for the judges to get to your group's thought process of, hey, we had one group one student was really interested in this topic. and then we combined and we sort of, came to this perspective. I think they would love to hear that. My suggestion would just be make sure it fits within the word limit, and I would pick one person in your group to be the kind of the writer of that paper. So instead of saying, I'm Jamie and here's what I did, and then I'm Chrissy and here's what I did, say, Rishi did this, and then Chrissy did this, and blah, blah, blah. So I hope that helps answer your question. But I think that idea of kind of how the individuals came together in a group is a really good idea. Just remember that you only get the one process paper with only 500 words, and you probably want that process paper to have kind of one voice, not 2 or 3 or 4 different voices in it. So I hope that answers your question. Good question. How your project relates to the Breaking Barriers in History theme is the last part of the process paper. This one is great because you pretty much answered this question in your summary statement, question 3. It's like the exact same thing. Explain how your project relates to the NHD theme this year. My advice to you on this one is to be direct. So your project should already help them understand the connections between your topic and the theme. So don't spend a ton of time on this. Just give them sort of the basics. I shouldn't say the basics, but you don't need to belabor the point. Clear and direct, like for the rest of the process paper, is really good advice here. So just make that connection as clearly as you can. You might even reuse some of the same wording that's in your thesis. A lot of times a good thesis is gonna relate that topic to relate your project to the Breaking Barriers in History theme. So it's okay to kind of borrow a little bit of your wording from the thesis, but just be direct, right? Your process paper can kind of make the claim, yeah, it relates in this way, but you don't need to bring all that evidence in and say, here's my proof, right? Here's the book that says that, here's the photo that shows that. Let your project do that part. So you just kind of make the claim in the paper and then let your project kind of bear that claim out. All right. But common questions that people ask about the process paper: no, there's not a minimum word count. If you can directly answer the questions in 300 words, that's fine. If you're doing it in like 100 words, you probably need more. Like, it's probably not thorough enough. But if you filled up a page, like a double space page, and you really feel like you've answered all the questions, you can, don't worry about a minimum word count. Another thing people ask, sometimes judges read your process paper before or after looking at the project. So don't assume that they are going to do it in one order or the other. They should do it before, but in practice, judges do it differently. This was the question I got in the chat earlier. No need to use headings or a title, but they are allowed. So a lot of times people will put process paper at the top along with their name. Obviously, that's fine, but you don't need to do headings. Like, you don't need to do part 4, how it relates to the theme. You can just kind of use separate paragraphs for those. So the formatting is not what the judges are looking for here. And then also in your process paper, don't use pictures or citations or anything like that. It's just your words, your student composed words. Okay, I got another question in the chat about websites that's kind of separate from the process papers. So I will answer that, but I want to make sure and call out, is there anybody with any other questions about the process papers? Do we count the title page in our 500 word limit? Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, your process paper is going to be limited to 500 words, but I think what the question is that title page I mentioned, does that count? And the answer is no, that does not count. That is kind of the same way like your bibliography doesn't count. It's not actually a part of the project. So I think what you're asking me here is, when you list these student composed words, or I'm sorry, when you list the words in the process paper, does it include these words on that title page itself? No, it does not. That is sort of just like your annotations. It's sort of free words. They don't count. So I hope that answers the question. Oh, process paper formatting and spacing. There's no specific requirement for this. I would not do anything fancy. So don't try and use like a clever font or anything like that. Those are really distracting to judges. They just want to like read your words. So usually the easiest way to do that is like the default settings of your word processor are great. So like if you just open up Word or open up Google and pretty much start typing, usually that's ideal. Usually that gives you like about a 1.5 spacing between your lines and usually about an 11-point font size. I would not go smaller than 10-point font. And do not use anything like Comic Sans or Papyrus or anything like that. You stick to like Times. It should just be pretty much just text. So yeah, don't go smaller than 10-point font just because judges, all of us as we age, our eyes work less well, and the judges a lot of times appreciate a little bit larger font. So just make sure it's readable, but there's no requirement. Your margins, an inch, half an inch, whatever you think looks good. No problems there. Whatever you want to do is fine. So just making sure that it's readable is the most important thing. I would really stick to fonts like Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, those types of things.